Hello and welcome to Matchup Plus Plus, the 6 Plus Plus show that helps you match up to the 40k meta. I'm Jack, and I am joined by Rob this week.
Hello, how are you? How are we all? I can speak.
Yeah, it's not doing well today, is it? So the reason I got Rob on here, our resident Archon, Dracon, I can't keep track anymore, is because we're talking about the Drukhari, Sky Splinter Assault. It's had a bit of a resurgence recently in the Pariah meta, and so we thought that's worth talking about. As we tend to do here on Matchup, we're just going to get straight to it. I'm just going to get straight into the stuff that you want to know. So let's talk about some basics to do with Sky Splinter Assault. So the army rule is pain tokens, which can give you rerolls to hit and +1 AP in combat, and they can give you reroll advances and charges. Right?
Yep. Start the game with 3 of them, and we regenerate them when we kill things, and we things fail battle shot.
The detachment rule for this one is you when you disembark a unit from a transport, they get ignores cover for their shooting and lance in close combat. And there's a couple of stratagems that are quite important that we're probably going to bring up several times, and they're kind of key to how the whole detachment works and the playstyle of the army. Do you want to go through those, Rob?
Yeah, so Wraithlight Retreat lets you fall back at the end of the fight phase to embark in a transport. Witches don't have to embark, though. They can just go wherever they want, so they just get to move 8 inches in any direction. Pounce on the prey, so disembark and charge after a transport's moved. Considering all of our melee units are in transports, this makes our threat ranges quite large and is effectively a better version of advance and charge if you're going through the open. And Swoopy Mockery, so a 6-inch reactive move on transports when you move within 9. So we've seen how powerful this is on things like Canoptic Court in the past. And Drukhari have their own version. You can use it defensively or offensively to move forward to get better staging.
All right, awesome. So let's go on some data. So let's see a couple of caveats as we always do. The data is for the top 40% of players that we have data for. It's not for the entire meta as a whole. Just keep that in mind when we're looking over these numbers. So in terms of the detachments that Sky Splinter does best against, we've got Dark Angels, we've got an 8% win rate there. Chaos Space Marines, we've got a 67% win rate, and we've got Necrons for a 65% win rate. In terms of performing worst, Chaos Demons, we've got a 41% win rate. Grey Knights got a 45% win rate, and Leagues of Votann, we've got a 52% win rate. This is another one of those things where, because the win rate is quite high for this faction, when the lowest is like 52%, they're doing all right. Their overall win rate is 67%. They have 5 event wins, and 4% of the player population is on this detachment right now. Rob, what do you think of those numbers?
Yeah, it's a very good time to be an Archon. I'm quite surprised it's so high in the top 40% of players. And some of those win rates against factions are quite surprising for me. But I think that's a sign of where the meta has been and where it's going to go after WTC and seeing some of the lists, I think. So should we go through them all? So yeah. Dark Angels. In the previous form of Dark Angels, it was a Dark Angels with not many invuns, relied a lot on shooting. We have quite closed boards. So it has been very good hunting grounds for Drukhari. We love eating marine bodies. We love eating tanks with 3-up saves. So that doesn't surprise me. 80% seems very high, but it doesn't quite surprise me. I do think that's going to change hugely now that people are cottoning on to Deathwing Knights and Judicias, though. They one of the things that our faction really hates is fights first and things with -1 damage and invulnerable saves, which they have a heap of.
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, Dark Angels are kind of a slower faction in general, which I feel like the Dark Elder can kind of take advantage of. So it kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, we can pick off bits and pieces, and if you don't have the resilience, it's quite fatal. So Chaos Space Marines, this one isn't surprising. We do what Chaos Space Marines do, just we have a bit more speed, effectively. If either of our army's units hit each other, they die. and we just have more units to force those trades. So that makes perfect sense to me. All we're seeing is the real space, not the real space, the Renegade Raiders, and that is Drukhari and Power Armor. That gets less units, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Chaos Space Marines aren't really known for being hyper resilient. So, and it's only really those really, really high end resilience units that the Drukhari would struggle with anyway. So I can see why Chaos Space Marines may have issues. As you say, they play a similar game, but they just do it better.
Yeah, definitely. Then Necrons. So I think this would be an interesting one to look at if we broke it down by detachment, because I think one of our worst matchups is actually Hypercrypt because of their output. But into the other detachment now, the 18 Wraith build is gone. I think we're very solid into Necrons because our profiles just line up so well into them. But yeah, it's a surprising one because it's one of the ones that I see that when I do draw it in a GT, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a tough one. It's an interesting piece of data, that.
Why do you say Necron Hypercrypt is one of the worst matchups?
So 3-inch deep strike, and what are the rapid fire?
And Mythic Exterminators.
Yes, they will pick up that. Those 3 models in that one unit will pick up 3 Drukhari units with no problem, and there's nothing you can do it for so many turns. You can only screen deep strike, 3-inch deep strike for so long. So that is a very tough matchup, but we are very good at picking them up once they're on the ground.
I think a more common build at the moment for Necrons is like still quite Satan heavy. It's a very small number of units, but they're things like Satan, which I'm not sure how well Drukhari deal with Satan.
Not well at all. There's one unit in the Codex that actually can kill a Catan, which is the Court of the Archon, all juiced up because they have lethals. So a Drukhari game plan against a Catan is usually ignore it or put your entire army into it. And if there's 3 Catan, that's almost 900 points worth of models. It just means you kill the other 1100 points worth of stuff, and they can't score cards or primary.
Interesting. Okay. In terms of performing worst against, so we got the Chaos Demons, the Grey Knights, and the Leagues of Votann. What are you thinking there?
So Chaos Demons, they are a horrible matchup if there's a Great Unclean one in Rodigus because we just can't kill them. They 3-inch deep strike and drop in the middle of our army or just on an objective, and we can't kill them quick enough. And then there's flamers that do a whole heap of damage. Their profiles basically are very good into our profiles, and Drukhari struggling to 4-up invulnerable saves and high toughness, which is Chaos has in absolute spades. There's only so long we can move block them.
And then I got to imagine the story is quite similar for Grey Knights, right? The difference there is they got a 2-up armor save instead of the invulnerable saves. Even though they do have a lot of invulnerable saves across the board, though.
Yeah, so our shooting is very useless, basically, into Grey Knights. The baby carriers, the only way we kill them is with Haywire, basically. We kill them in combat pretty well, but again, they have access to 3-inch deep strike, and we are one of the armies where storm bolters actually really hurt us. So they can drop in, pick up a couple of units with storm bolters, and then charge something.
Yeah, I mean those incinerators and psy cannons on the Dread Knights are really going to do a lot of damage.
Yeah, it's historically always been a horrible matchup for Drukhari Grey Knights because they have mists to get away from our scary charges. We've got some tricks to try and get around it, but it's a very hard fought game.
And then Leagues of Votann, not necessarily a bad matchup, obviously, because it's a winning one percentage, but it is one of the worst ones that the Drukhari have. I have to imagine again, it's because of the resilience, right? You got 2-up armor in cover, void armor makes things very difficult to deal with because the predominant build is a double land fortress. So
the double land fort is hard for us. The Haywire Scourge, if you can keep them alive, they can do a lot of damage to it. But it's so swiggy if we pick them up or not. And their guns, again, their bolters and everything are just the perfect profile into all of our units. Strength 6 with Twin Link, just chews through everything. Um, and yeah, I am a bit surprised about Leagues of O10 as well. If a Drukhari player goes first into Leagues of O10, this is before they had their infiltrate units. They
Hmm.
never left their deployment zone for 3 turns.
Yeah.
So I'm quite surprised about this. It's quite an interesting one as well.
Yeah, after you get past Grey Knights and Chaos Demons, it does kind of become a bit of a jumble.
Yeah.
So I kind of just picked the one with the most games played.
Okay.
But there's quite a few factions on 52%.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's all around that. So they're all winnable games. But yeah, Chaos Demons is and Grey Knights. They are two horrible matchups for us.
yeah, okay, that's super interesting. That's something to go on. We do have like a kind of commonality between a lot of these factions, right? The ones you perform worst against are more like high resilience armies, 3-inch deep strike, like certain weapon profiles. The ones you perform best against are, I think, armies that aren't like
They're middling armies. If they try and do
yeah,
two things, we probably do those two things that we're doing slightly better.
yeah,
With
and they're
the,
also armies you're considerably faster than as well.
yeah.
Which I think is probably not. Which, to be fair, you say about a lot of armies with Drukhari, but um, yeah, so that's interesting. So most wanted. So these are the units that are most or seen in almost every single supply splinter list. So these are units. These 4 units, or combinations of units, Incubi with Archons, Witches with Lilith, Mandrakes, and then Raiders and Venoms, all have a 100% sort of taken rate. They're in every single 4-on-1 Sky Splinter list. So the Incubi with Archon, you mentioned before that unit kills most stuff. Is that the reason it's taken? Is that I
Yeah,
would presume
basically
so?
that is our. Would you call it a scalpel? It's more of a hammer because it hits so hard. It will on average kill an Armiger in combat. It will strip 10 plus wounds off a big knight. It will pick up almost any infantry unit in the game. Um, what does that is the Archon gives the Incubi full rerolls, and hopping out of a transport you get Lance. So your strength forward Lance with full rerolls. So absolutely worst case is you're hitting on threes rerolling, which is like a 90% conversion rate,
Yeah,
and then
better
you're
than twos.
yeah, and then you're wounding on fives rerolling, which is basically a 50% conversion rate at AP3 into anything in the game. So they're so flexible. They have enough attacks to go through hordes and vehicles and almost anything. So they are just an absolute all-star unit.
Right, yeah. And then Witches and Lilith. I mean, Witches are primarily there to be a mechanism for delivering Lilith, right? Or
Yeah,
blade
so
wounds, right?
they're ablative wounds, and I would say for me, more importantly, they're OC.
Yeah,
So there's a couple of ways of playing with Lilith. You can park her in a safe little L on an objective, and anyone who tries to charge her is just going to die. So she just locks down an objective for the entirety of the game unless people can get shooting angles. Or you could just throw her with 10 witches and just use her as an absolute missile. And like I say, the witches are just ablative wounds. So her average is 15 AP4 saves on a target when she activates. It's
yeah,
only damage 1, but it's just so reliable.
yeah. I mean, she's just a really powerful combat character with fights first, right? So
Yeah.
it's just a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
Mandrake's mission play pieces, right? And
Yeah, just
infiltrate.
they do two things. One unit will infiltrate if your opponent has scary scout moves to stop that. And they infiltrate and they up and down to score cards. That's their job. They're 65 points and they're very good at it.
And obviously, it goes without saying, Raiders and Venoms, they enable basically all the strats and all of the good stuff in this detachment. So,
Yeah.
kind of revolves around those. I don't think we need to go too much into why you would take them. But yeah. All right, let's talk about lists. So, there's a couple of variations of this going around, but I think this one that you sent me is probably the most sort of quintessential Sky Splinter list thing you're most likely to see most of the time.
Yeah.
I think at this point it's becoming quite typical. So do you want to go through this one for us?
Yeah. So we start off with 3 Archons. One of them has Nightmare Shroud. One of them has Spiteful Raider. So basically, in this detachment, you want Nightmare Shroud almost all the time. What that does is stop Overwatch. So if you have a 10-man brick of Incubi, you can walk out and absolutely destroy something with no risk of Overwatch if there's flamers or anything like that. Spiteful Raider gets you an extra pain token, but to be honest, that was in the list when I wrote this because I had 10 points left over. And I think the GT I went to, I remembered it 1 out of 6 games. It's not important. It's there to fill a 1990 point list. So those Archons, one of them will attach to the court. That will be the Warlord. So the Warlord Archon gives you a Vectora. The court gives you Fight First and some other buffs, some defensive buffs. So what that lets you do is park them in front of your deployment zone, near some objectives, and have a massive Vectora that is really hard to interact with. I played a game the other day against Drukhari, and it was really frustrating to play against because suddenly Archon is 2 CP, Interrupted is 3 CP. It can't be understated how powerful this is, especially into a combat heavy with a combat heavy army.
Yeah,
you can just get rid of people's defenses. And the other Warlord, he just attaches to 5 Incubi. So again, that's a little unit that will pick up almost anything in the game.
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of people put the Nightmare Shroud on the Warlord, but that's not something you want to do because that way it spreads out the prevent you from overwatching me kind of situation.
Yeah.
So
there's a couple of ways of doing it. If you're not running a court, maybe, but there's a couple of ways of doing it. And like you were saying at the start, there's probably 1,500 points of this list that is every Sky Splinter list, and then you've got kind of 400 or 500 points to play with, which is your tailoring. So after that, we've got the Beastmaster. The Beastmaster is a unit with 22 wounds. It has a Scout 9 and 12-inch move and rerolls charges. What that lets you do is move 21 inches turn 1 if you aren't screened. Charge something or move block. This unit's job is to throw itself forward turn 1 and let you score primary, because that is something that is a weakness of Drukhari, is living on objectives. So this will throw up on a flank, try and hold your opponent there for a turn while your Cabalites go up and stick you an objective. Or you get Lilith on there as well, just for the fights first there.
Right.
Yeah. Lilith, we've already talked about her, just super killy. Can be defensive or offensive. Cabalites, so we've got 2 squads going in 2 Venoms. What we generally do with this is put all the good guns in the Venoms. So it creates this little gunboat that's got 9 anti-infantry damage 2 attacks, a couple of anti-tank shocks, a flamer, and the amount of damage these guys can output, especially into marine-type bodies, is absolutely absurd for a battle line choice. And they have the OC. They are okay in combat with a pain token and lance. They're wounding most things on 5s with an AP, re-rolling hits, which isn't horrible. They are all stars. I think they're my favorite unit in the Codex because they just do a little bit of everything and just can't be ignored.
Yeah.
Witches, again, they'll go in a Venom is how I usually run them, attached with Lilith, just to go sit in a point or be a missile. What Venoms do is at the end of the fight phase, if you're wholly within 6 of it, you can hop back in. So you can use her to jump out, punch something that's on an objective, hide again, and just keep the cycle going. Do that with Lilith or Incubi or Cabalites even. Then we have the Raiders and Venoms. Again, just great transports. Venoms, good anti-infantry firepower. Raiders are just there to ferry around the 10-man Incubi and the court. Then the Incubi, we've talked about them already with the Archons. Mandrakes, we've talked about them just doing uppy and downy. I used to run 3, but I think 2 is the good spot because it lets you fit more killing power in your list. And Scourge. So it's kind of turned into the standard 2 squads of Dark Lancers and 1 squad of Haywire. So the 2 Dark Lance squads are there to keep your opponent honest. Their output is good but swingy. It's only 4 shots hitting on 4s. You can get rerolls to hit. Strength 12, AP 3, D6 plus 2 damage. So I think, like we were talking about in the tough matchups, they will struggle to kill things with invulnerable saves. With 2 up armor or T12 and above, it becomes so swingy. That's where the Haywire Blasters come in. So they, on average, when they shoot, do 9 dev wounds to any vehicle they shoot at. So that they fill a hole in the list, which is things like Land Raider Redeemers, land forts you usually can't kill. They plug that gap. Some games they're going to be absolutely useless if you face Nids or something like that. But with their movement and their fire and fade, they actually make really effective move blockers as well. It catches people out quite a bit when you move 20 plus D6 inches with a squad that they thought was a gun squad and just set up a move block.
Yeah, I mean, Scourge are probably one of the best units in 40k. Like, yeah. I mean, people would do anything for units like this, really. And I scarcely see a Dark Eldar list and many Eldar lists these days that don't have 3 of these guys in there. So they're absolute cash money. Yeah, I mean that all sounds good. I mean, what's if you're playing against someone, right? So I mean, your big threats in this list are going to be the 2 Incubi units with Archons and the Lilith unit. Probably they're the main ones, right? And then you have your range shooting, which is your the Venoms and the Scourge. That's like your main fire base, right?
Yeah.
So things to watch out for, I guess. Is there anything like any surprises in there that people need to be worried about, or have we basically covered everything?
Yeah, I think the main thing is threat ranges from the Raiders and Venoms with the Incubi. So the strat that we talked about before with the Sunsweeping Mockery, the hop out after you move. Mm-hmm. What it effectively means in gaming terms is where that transport is, you're going to have 5 or 6 or 10 guys who are going to murder anything hopping out 17 inches from that point. And that can't be understated enough how far that is, especially with how we've got terrain at the moment. You can almost hit people's deployment zones with that from a safe spot. So that is a huge thing you have to be aware of. Scourge, they are swingy if you are scared of them. Measure 6 in measure so they can't fire and fade to cover, because all they are T3 bodies with a 4 up armor save. They die horribly as soon as you see them. So if you make them take risks, they will just die horribly. What else do we have? The Cabalites in the Venoms, just don't underestimate the firepower. They will absolutely shred marine bodies. They will take wounds off anything. And I guess the last thing is the Wraithlight Retreat. So when that 10-man Incubi unit comes out and kills your 400-point unit, and then they spend a CP to hop back in, it can really be quite frustrating for your opponent.
All right. Okay, so tips and tricks. So some of this stuff we've kind of covered already, but destroy the transports, right? The entire detachment is it works around the transports. So destroying them needs to be a priority, really.
It's such a cliche thing into Drukhari, even since 9th, but it's doubly important now.
Yeah. So then we've also got CP management, which is something we sort of touched on a minute ago. The Vectora makes things really... it's very easy to think you have enough CP for stuff, only to not realize you're in the Vectora, because a 12-inch bubble is an enormous area of the board.
Yeah.
So that can really sort of scupper your plans in trying to deal with stuff. It also, if you've got stuff like prepared positions, which is a mission rule that we have on UKTC, which gives you like free go to ground hurricane intervention, it makes those cost 1.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. So it's something you really need to be aware of for the entire game, basically.
Yeah. If you find yourself considering re-rolling something, if you stop to think about it, just don't. You will need it later on.
Yeah. And with the way that the UKTC terrain is as of current, it's very easy to sort of project that out onto the midfield because of the way the terrain covers you. So that's pretty cool. We mentioned before T1, but Beast, Pack, Charge, and Move blocks. Something you need to be aware of. If you have infiltrators in your list, it's a good idea to use those to sort of block where they want to go.
Yep.
So
they can put you a turn behind, so it is the first thing you need to really be aware of.
Yeah, especially if you're an army that really, really doesn't want to be tagged in combat.
Yeah,
That's something that you really need to look out for. Stuff that we haven't, I've not written down, but it's worth covering. Measuring threat ranges.
yes,
It can catch you off. It's kind of like Wild Eaters in that regard. You can be caught off guard by how quickly that some of these units can move. So you need to make sure that you know how far they can go. Which is kind of, I think, a strength of this Sky Splinter, because you will end up assuming that everything can. You have to end up assuming that everything's going to do the max when only one unit can do the max.
yep,
So, so I think if you're gonna, I think something worth keeping in mind is if you're gonna make a play, make a play. I think as we spoke about earlier when we went over the data, Sky Splinter does excel at picking off things that are isolated, that are slow, that are far away from everything else that you can heroically intervene into, or something like that. That you can't heroically intervene into because you're far away. Those are the sorts of things that Sky Splinter really like to see.
Yeah.
It makes it's very easy for them to deal with. So, if you're going to go for something, go for it and go push more than one unit out at once, basically, rather than drip feed stuff to the Drukhari, because then that'll just let them use their strats to just hit you without taking it in return.
Yeah. If there's nothing a Drukhari player likes more than seeing someone half commit or try and commit everywhere at once, because we can just, with our speed, we can just pick that part of the board, kill everything there, hop back in our transports, and do it again on the next objective.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we've not covered that you want to go over, tips and tricks, things that people need to be aware and playing into Sky Splinter?
If you do want to tailor a little bit into Drukhari, which I think isn't just Drukhari, I think it's the meta at the whole at the moment with all the combat we're seeing. Fights first units. Fights first units just absolutely nullify the Incubi and Lilith. It means they can't charge them because although they are very killy, they are still T3 bodies with one wound, and they die absolutely horribly once they're out of their transports if they can't hop back in.
Yeah. I think we mentioned it before, infiltrate units are really helpful as well.
Yeah, you want at least one. Yeah,
just to help block the beast packs out. Very, very helpful. And I think that's about it. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, unless there's anything else you want to mention.
Yeah, just be aware of how killy they are. Don't let them get multi-charges with your big units, because they'll pick up multiple units. And just talk to your opponent and just make sure you understand their threat ranges, because, like you say, it is the most surprising thing when you start moving things and people go, "Oh God, what's happening?" And suddenly you've got half your army on one point.
Right. I've got one last question for you, Rob. As a Drukhari player, what is the one thing that you don't want to see in your opponent's army?
3-inch deep strike shooting.
Okay. So you heard it here, guys. Just get that in your army. Just go and get that.
Be one of those factions. Or fight first. Fight first is more achievable for most things.
Okay. Right. No problem. So on that note, that's us all done. So I believe the next episode is going to be on Dark Angels Gladius. So if there's any other factions that you want us to cover, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you so much, Rob, for coming in and helping me deconstruct this one. Sure as heck wouldn't be able to do it without you. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.